Good morning. Half a day, the Committee on General Government Operation, Appropriation, and Housing is now called to order. For the record, today is Wednesday, June 2nd, and the time now is 9 o'clock. Notice for this budget hearing was disseminated via email to all senators and all main media broadcasting outlets. First public notice was issued on Monday, May 24th, followed by Wednesday, May 26th. The committee will hear and accept testimonies on Bill 55-36 COR, the fiscal year 2022 Appropriation Act as requested by the governor, relative to the Department Administration fiscal year 2022 budget request. Joining me for this budget hearing is Senator Fellow Taitigui and Senator Tony Ada. General rules of this budget hearing shall be as follows. Those testifying on behalf of Bill 55-36 relative to the Department Administration are invited to the panel, and they are Mr. Edward Byrne and Bernie Jeans. And we have Shane, I don't know if this is Ngata? Okay. And Claudia Akfaji. All right. Written testimony shall be submitted to the committee. Please provide my legislative staff with your written testimony for photocopying. Testimony may be read, and lengthy testimony should be summarized to about 5 minutes. But Mr. Byrne, you'll be allowed all morning to testify on your department, all right? Hopefully it doesn't take all morning for you to get by. Those testifying will be allowed to present oral testimony. Once you're done, please remain in the room for questions or for additional testimony as may be desired by the committee. Question and testimony shall be confined to the substance of the agenda, which is your budget, DOA's budget. Personal inference as to the character or motive of any senator or any individual testifying is not permitted. Any violation of the general rule of conduct will result in removal from the budget hearing room. Proper form and decorum shall be practiced by all present in the public hearing room for these proceedings. Individuals who fail to maintain proper form and decorum may be restricted from providing oral testimony and will be escorted from the room. When you speak, please make sure that the microphone is on and that you speak into the microphone. Please state your name and your title for the record. At this time, I ask the panel members from the Department of Administration to rise and for our Sergeant at Arms to please swear them in.
Can you raise your right hand? Under penalty of perjury, do you all affirm that the testimony we will be providing today, whether it be electronically, verbally, or in writing, be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Mr. Chair, they're all in their oath. You may proceed.
Thank you, Sergeant at Arms. Mr. Byrne, we will have you lead off, and I'd remind your staff to please, when you speak, when you start, please identify yourself. And then from there on, you don't have to keep reminding of who you are. All right, Mr. Byrne, here you have some slides. You want to present?
Yes, sir.
Do you have copies of those slides? If not, I'm hoping the staff is making copies of them. All right, okay, then go ahead and begin, and then we'll just catch up with you when we look at the slides. Thank you, Mr. Byrne.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some remarks first, and then we'll go into the presentation, if we may. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Senators. My name is Edward Byrne, Director of the Department of Administration. Thank you for inviting us to present our proposals for the Department of Administration budget for fiscal year 2022. With me today is the Deputy Director, Bernie Guinness, who joined the department about 3 months ago, and two of our departmental heads, Shane Gata of Human Resources and Claudia Fage of the General Services Agency. It has been my privilege to lead DOA for the past 3 years, beginning with the fiscal shock of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, through restoring fiscal integrity and stabilizing cash flow, to managing priorities during the current ongoing pandemic emergency. The staff at DOA have worked to keep government functioning, and I ask that you senators recognize the hard work of all the staff at DOA. During the lockdown, we never closed. All our divisions were working to support frontliners, essential health workers, law enforcement, and agencies operating long hours under trying conditions. DOA staff ensured that GovGuam workers were paid, vendors were secured to provide needed goods and services, those vendors were paid routinely, business and economically distressed individuals received cash support payments, economic impact payments, and unemployment checks and direct deposited were distributed timely, all at the same time as establishing systems so that we could conform to the new federal reporting requirements required by Treasury in order that they could in turn monitor compliance with their own rules and regulations, which at that time were frequently changing. We completed our Treasury reports on time, while some large states, even with their much greater resources, struggled to comply with their CRF reports. Now we have to adapt to the changed conditions, challenging because they are not yet codified in final form, for the federal funds made available under the American Recovery Plan Act. From information made available to us from Treasury websites and conference calls, which are usually scheduled when we should be sleeping, there is a completely different reporting regime for the ARP funding. It's worth recalling some of the important achievements and ongoing efforts that we've made over the last 2 years of the Leon Guerrero-Tenori administration. In cooperation with Department of Revenue Taxation, tax refunds are now being paid to individual taxpayers in less than 3 months after the filing of their tax returns. War claims were paid out to long-deserving World War II survivors before the federal program was operating. In cooperation with the Department of Health and Human Services, income support payments were made to families who were hit hardest by the pandemic economic downturn. Under the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, we are making much-needed rent assistance and power and water payments on behalf of renters whose reduced incomes cause them to be in arrears with rent and utility bills. When the appropriate funds have been received, we will stand up a similar program, also federally funded, for homeowners who are left out of the rental assistance program. In a program which provides better benefits than the FEMA federal program, we have paid bereavement payments to the families who lost loved ones because of the coronavirus, with all the sensitivity that goes with serving those coping with their loss. Recognition for this should go to the Employee Benefits Division for their work here. Even in the difficult circumstances of a lockdown, we issued our fiscal 2019 financial statements in August 2020, months ahead of our fellow territories. And as you now know, we issued our fiscal 2020 statements over the weekend, 1 month ahead of our usual reporting date, in spite of the unusual and challenging circumstances surrounding the pandemic. Payment of vendor invoices 30 days after invoice date for invoices received timely by DOA. This allows vendors to firm up cash flows and removes the uncertainty associated with government contracts, which in turn led to higher pricing. We've not finished. Current projects include formulating an interim pay adjustment with government nurses from all nurse employing agencies, following an interim adjustment for correction officers at DOC and DYA. Completing payments due from the previously authorized but unfunded competitive pay appeal process. Reviewing and reformatting performance appraisals for employees to achieve a higher standard of of their performance. Fully evaluating law enforcement pay scales for measurement of hazardous conditions, implementing a fully comprehensive competitive wage adjustment to include the government benefit package, rationalizing and updating procurement policies needed because much of our future procurement will use federal funding over the next 3 years. Implementing an updated financial management information system, as has been noted by both our independent auditors and the public auditor, many findings or deficiencies that were reported can be directly attributed to our legacy system. There is no need or usefulness in explaining why we've been able to update it. Lack of funding prevented investment. Technology has changed the way we all interact over the last 20 years. There are so many aspects of our lives which we conduct differently because of new technology. GovGuam is no different. Increased transactions and rapid reporting drive our needs, and that is why the change is considered an emergency. DOA continues to press the Attorney General's office for finalization on this matter. In the past, DOA was often blamed for delay or error by line agencies. From time to time, in this hearing room, agencies would appear before you senators and attribute a missed target or an incomplete task to DOA. DOA's main purpose is to provide a central provider of administrative services so that agencies can concentrate on their core mission. However, to make this work, open communication between agencies and DOA is essential. Rules and regulations are there to protect employees and achieve equity across government. If an outdated regulation or job description needs to be updated, we will work with the agency to cure that difficulty administratively. That's our job. Agencies may not get all that they ask, but DOA will fully consider the entire situation and the big picture. I support the work of my staff. If the fault or responsibility is an issue and wrongly described to DOA or any other group, the problem will never be solved and will persist and recur. Last year's budget law for this year's budget reduced DOA's budget request by just under 10%. This impacted our ability to recruit needed middle management staff, mainly deputies for division heads. We did stand up an internal audit department already performing performance audits on Medicaid administration and tender effectiveness, but this was only possible because we were unable to recruit a CFO. We are working on this. A $2.5 billion enterprise needs a CFO. Our budget presentation will follow. We are asking that the deputies noted above are funded, that we have enough funding to improve procurement, not only at GSA, but throughout the whole procurement cycle, from requisition to PO to receipt to payment. We are also asking for a contact for shredding records already identified as eligible for disposal, and we're asking that that be funded. These requests are not frivolous. They're designed to respond to agency, auditor, or DOA identified needs, and we ask that you include these this year, especially those which exceed the Governor's executive budget for DOA, which was forwarded to you. Our presentation will identify these. I gained my chartered accountant qualification 45 years ago and have spent every year since then in finance, accounting, and more than 25 years in human resources and purchasing. This job is by far the most challenging, but also the most rewarding that I have had, as I and my team can and do make a difference as we support those who serve the people of Guam, and we've also been privileged to directly serve the people with some of the programs that I've already mentioned. Sometimes truths can be found in comedy. The Greek playwright Aristophanes, writing in the 4th century BC in his play The Frogs, wrote, "Megalon gnomon kai didnoion isakai tau remata dictane." Loosely translated, this means high thoughts demand high words. I hope that the words that I have said today, and those that my staff will speak to, will resonate and permit you to fully fund DOA, which for so many years has not been possible. Thank you, Senators. I'm going to ask my deputy to make the presentation, and afterwards we'll be happy to answer your questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Byrne. I'd like to also recognize my colleagues that have joined us. We have the oversight of HR with DOA, which is the Vice Speaker, Tina Rose Munoz Barnes. We have Senator Duenas that have joined us, Senator Brown, and Senator Paris. Mr. Ed, go ahead and just continue on with your presentation. Okay, are you going to do the slides now?
Yeah,
or?
we're going to go ahead and do the slides. Can we go ahead and put it on the screen?
All right, there you go.
All right. Good morning, Senators. My name is Bernadine Guinness. I am the Deputy Director for Department of Administration. I'll go ahead and go through the slides, and then we can continue on with the questions thereafter. DOA is responsible for the effective administration of the internal business functions of the Government of Guam, management of financial, supply, and manpower resources relative to the government operations, providing executive leadership and management to the 3 divisions under the purview of the department, and supporting department-wide needs regarding fiscal, public relations, and safety. DOA also maintains the record management program for the government. DOA also supports many essential line agencies which could not operate without the services that DOA offers. The Director's Office currently is a center point for the agency, and we currently only have 5 staff that is housed in that office. We are seeking the unfunded employee positions for the amount of $754,722, and unfunded contract amount of $200,000, excuse me. Next slide. One of our divisions within the department is the Human Resources Division, managed by our Personnel Service Administrator, Mr. Shane Nata. The mission of the Human Resources Department Division is to administer the Human Resource Management Program in the areas of recruitment, test development and validation, classification and compensation, administrative services and records, employment management relations, public employee management relations, equal employment opportunity, drug-free workplace, training and development, and employee benefits. The division also provides assistance and guidance to line departments and agencies within the executive branch so that the employees and managements comply with applicable human resources mandates. Next slide. So these are the goals and objectives of the HR division within the department. I'll just go through some of them because it's a little bit lengthy, but I'll just highlight quite a few. First and foremost, improve services to the department and agencies in all aspects of human resources. In addition, updating processes and protocols to accommodate the impact of COVID-19, ensuring the safety of employees and the general public. Successful negotiations with health insurance providers and the employment of employees, retirees, and survivors into the new health insurance plan and life insurance. Next goal was to assess current training needs of departments and agencies to help and determine what is feasible in regards to providing training in alternative ways to ensure the safety of all employees. Next, we have enhancement of the current Human Resource Information System, the HRIS, to more efficiently to more efficiently the execution of personnel-related actions with improved tracking capabilities. This includes the increased ability to expeditiously recruit for critical positions within the government. In addition, the enhancement of current HRIS to a web-based model that allows the increased access to HR services for both employees and the general public. Also, to conduct random drug testings for all test-designated positions within the Government of Guam, especially those in critical departments and agencies to include public safety, law enforcement, healthcare, and transportation. Next slide. The position that we're seeking funding for is the Assistant Personnel Administrator, Service Administrator, which on the organizational chart you can see would fall right under the Personnel Service Administrator, which is managed by Mr. Nata. The challenges, if not funded, would be decreased capacity to address multiple HR-related issues with compensation, and lack of resource for modernized training programs, lack of resource for enhanced recruitment efforts throughout the government, and the need to administer an updated health insurance program, for example, self-funded insurance dental. The next slide. The next division within the department is the Division of Accounts. The mission of the Division of Accounts is responsible for the administration of all internal accounting activities within the government. Under Public Law 1396, it defines agencies and their funds for which the division performs central accounting responsibilities. The division incorporates the Treasurer of Guam and payroll and covers 49 line departments and agencies and 10 autonomous agencies. They also maintain an efficient system of financial reporting and controls and ensures that effective collection investments of all revenues. In addition, they perform mandated reporting for various funds and keeps current GAAP, GASB pronouncements and applies them to the financial reporting. For over 20 years, the division utilized the current legacy financial accounting system. The system runs on the old platform and has been slightly updated since its installation. DOA is reviewing for a cloud-based financial management system to improve financial reporting and controls. The next slide, please. So this is the goals and objectives for this particular division. We are here to establish and provide an integrated financial management system, the FMS, and controls for organizational units of the government, provide accurate and timely financial information for effective management and compliance with statutory mandates and requirements. The FMS integrates DOA, will integrate DOA and DRT's TPS standalone systems to provide more efficiency. In addition, the division continues the task of recording and maintaining government capital assets in accordance with the reporting requirements of GASB 34 and 42. They centralize preparation and review of all financial reports, financial status reports for all grant awarded to various agencies. They deploy the automation of the FSRS and trains the departments on how to reconcile to the FMS system. In addition, is to continue capturing, recording, and reporting financial information for the comprehensive financial annual reports, the CAFRs. In addition, the project cash status of the general fund account and disseminate financial information for management's final disposition, communicate with designated POS programmers to timely process all payments, respond to increasing technical and complex environment with the demand of flexibility and responsiveness in cash management, respond to the demand in services and billing and collection of payment dues to the government, and respond to the concerns toward our services in collections, disbursements, and payments. Lastly, the goals for the division is to develop a module that shall display a financial information for public viewing. Next slide, please. The position that is unfunded we are looking to fund is the Chief Financial Officer, which again falls under the Director's Office. If not funded, the challenges for if it is not funded is the needed expertise to best utilize the new FMS system. In addition, manage new reporting requirements and needed to lead efforts for the more frequent and user-friendly reporting. Okay. Our next slide, please. The next division within the agency is the General Services Agency, manned by our Chief Procurement Officer, Ms. Claudia. So GSA administers a centralized procurement program for the government departments and agencies by promoting economy, efficiency, and effectiveness in the procurement of supplies and services. The GSA warehouse also serves as a resource for common supplies as the central inventory used by the Government of Guam's department and agencies. In addition, GSA carries out its mandate for fair and equitable purchasing processes in compliance with legislation, regulations, and mandates of the Procurement Policy Office. Next slide, please. Lastly, the GSA's goals and objectives. GSA continues to review and update the procurement rules and regulations, continues to provide procurement process training to the agencies, and expeditiously procures their needs. To also to manage the Tenden Gubetnu as an inventory resource, and to fully automate the inventory system. To work towards fully automating the surplus branch within the FMS system, ensuring compliance with federal regulations, and to annually reconcile surplus inventories. Provide increased public confidence, exercising fair and equitable treatment, providing for increased economy in procurement by maximizing the purchase value of public funds, fostering effective broad-based competition, and providing safeguards for the maintenance of a procurement system of total quality and integrity. And lastly, coordinate with processes and procedures utilized by the federal procurement departments to gain price advantage. Next slide, please. So the unfunded position we are seeking is the Assistant Chief Procurement Officer. Challenges that is if not funded will result in procurement delays and inefficiencies. The position, if you can take a look at the organizational chart, will fall under the Chief Procurement Officer. In addition, we're seeking the 4 buyer positions. If those were not filled, it would continue the delay of procurement, increase critical audit findings, and to assist the need for the shredding contract to destroy records already identified for destruction. Okay. Lastly, within the department, we have the Internal Audit Division, which falls directly under the Director's Office. The Internal Audit Division was created in January 2021 and housed under the Director's Office. They established policies and procedures to perform audits with management emphasis to prevent reportable conditions and deviations. The division also follows up with departments and agencies' recommendations made by the OPA. Lastly, they review policies and procedures of Public Health, Bureau of Health and Financing Administration, to prevent federal lines and promote program integrity as set forth in the Governor's October 1st, 2020 letter to Alex M. Azar II, Secretary of Department of Human Services. Okay, so that concludes our presentation for you. We can go ahead and proceed with the questionings.
All right, thank you, Ms. Janice. One simple question on your division of accounts, goals and objective. You've identified FMS integrates DOA and DRTs. What's the TPS? What is that? Total pay system, what?
It's
Taxpayer system?
yes, it's the system that records receipts. principally by taxpayers, but it's a receipt recording system. And at the moment, it's divided into two sections, so that when we receive a receipt, for instance, the Treasurer of Guam, they have to enter that receipt into both systems, rather than just make one entry.
Okay, so that's to make sure, because I'm well aware that when payments received at the Treasury versus collection branch at Revenue and Tax, sometimes they don't see each other. So that means when you receive it at Treasurer of Guam, DRT will be able to see that the payment was made. Am I correct?
Yes, sir. I mean,
Okay.
yeah, what Treasurer does is endeavor that happens by putting it in both systems. But that's a very inefficient process, and the customer is left standing waiting for that entry to be made in both processes. And,
Yes.
and that's kind of a discomfort to taxpayers too.
Okay. Now based on just, I'm going to ask a very simple question before I ask my colleagues to ask, I know a long list of questions, but simple one. You've identified in your slides you're requesting for additional funding. Is that in your budget request of the 8,355,000?
No, Senator.
That's a plus up. So
it's
what
an
would be your
additional-
what would be your total budget request then?
Well, it's an additional 1.3 million that we need to fund these, what we consider to be really important programs.
Okay. Another simple one is because I know that you have folks that have retired, and I've noticed some of them, you didn't identify any funding for them, but you've got the funds today because they retired already within this fiscal year. Wouldn't it be wise that on some of them, you just maintain that funding? And then when you get the budget of a lump sum, you can adjust it so you can meet your requirements. Because I know I know HR, for example, they just lost one person this month or last month. And you still have the funding for the rest of the year. And I'm just concerned, Mr. Burns, that you've got some, I mean, how many folks have retired this year, in this fiscal year, 2021?
We've just had two.
Just two? Yeah. Okay, then that's not a whole lot, but that's still some money to look at. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and ask my colleagues to ask questions, then I'll ask at the tail end. And I'll begin with the Vice Speaker, the oversight on HR, and then we'll proceed to Senator Tello, and then we'll jump across and go down the line from Senator Adadam. All right, Madam Vice Speaker.
Situs Masi, Mr. Chair, Manana Situs, and thank you to you, Director Byrne, and for your team here presenting this morning. I do want to say, Mr. Chair, that I do appreciate this presentation given by your deputy. Thank you, Ms. Burney. And what really strikes me is at least the justification based on your goals and objectives, but more importantly, the amounts and the need. And as we look at this, I do have a list of questions, and if one or two have already been answered, I would probably just ask for a reiteration. So I'm going to start with the line of questioning now, okay? With that being said, I'm going to start off with the report that happened earlier this year. Earlier this year, it was reported that the Department of Administration was going through the emergency purchase of a new financial management information system. What is that status of the this emergency purchase? I know we talked about it earlier, but
Yes, thank you, Vice Speaker. I mentioned it briefly in my opening remarks. We are waiting, as so often happens, we're waiting for the Attorney General's office to finally report to us. My last conversation with the Chief Deputy Attorney General was on Friday, when I reminded her that this is, one, supposed to be an emergency, and two, that they've had this request with them for round about 6 weeks now. I often hear of the difficulties, and Claudia might refer to these later, associated with these contracts that get held up in this fashion. I well understand, that the purpose of having the Attorney General's review is to prevent or at least reduce the likelihood of a protest. And indeed, generally, that's happened. But if the result is that there's a whole lot of delayed procurement, I don't know that we've achieved too much, because the delay and the protest may amount to the same thing. So I'm pushing it and pushing it, because, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, and thank you, it's an emergency, but also we're getting towards the end of the current financial year, and we don't want to implement it at the same time as the year end.
Thank you. Yeah, I do know that this is very critical. I know that this has been brought up to the forefront, even with the media, and I want to make sure that we move on this. So hopefully our office can continue to assist in that area as committed to you earlier. Thank you for that response. I do know also that you know that it's very important, the importance of audits, and especially audits on financial statements, especially in the Government of Guam. And while the Office of Public Accountability, which I have oversight of also, is entrusted with conducting audits and administering procurement appeals, it is important that Government of Guam has its own internal audit division to continuously ensure frequent analysis and assessment. So my question to you is, has DOA moved to create an internal audit division?
Yes, thank you, Vice Speaker. Yes, we have. We initially recruited 2 auditors. One of them decided to return to the OPA, and so we're in the process of recruiting a chief auditor within DOA. So far, the Internal Audit Department has completed an audit of the Medicaid refund process, and there's a summary of that on our website. It's a summary because we can't put all the details up because of the details associated with private health information that was included in that audit. But there's a workable summary on our website. And we're also looking at some other processes, including the operations of the tender inventory. The goal, obviously, is to make it a strong, functioning internal audit department. And if the difference between an internal audit department and an external audit department is that we can change processes when we find that there's some change that needs to be made as we go along, whereas the OPA has to wait and really until the end of the audit and then make his recommendations and then wait for some action that takes place, hopefully, months, if not years later. But we want to be effective. We want to be reactive. We need to get this chief auditor, but we have stood up the department and it is operating today.
Okay. Thank you for that justification. My next question is, we've heard that conducting an updated competitive wage study is one way to increase retention and recruitment. Does DOA have a plan for the implementation of the competitive wage study? And do you have any updates for the nurses' competitive wage study?
Yes,
2
thank you.
questions.
Thank you for that question, Vice Speaker. Yeah, a competitive wage study is long overdue. And this time, we don't want to be frustrated by having a competitive wage study and then being unable to fund it. So we're trying to move forward on both those fronts. I'll ask Shane to comment in a little bit in a minute, but just to update you on some of the processes. We already completed an interim study for DOC and DYA. That's in operation, and I think Shane will confirm that it has helped. Actually, the biggest advantage we got from it is its help with attendance, which in those 24 hours type operations is very important. We're in the middle of the nurses' pay study. We had one meeting with the nurses. There were some comments that they made that we've taken back to review and have redone a draft that will be submitted to the governor in the next 2 or 3 days, incorporating some of those comments. And then we will move on to other groups as we do this, because we're trying to get these processes administratively taken care of so that we can take our time with the competitive wage study if we've dealt with these groups as we go. But I'll invite Shane to comment a little bit on that too.
Good morning, Senators. Just to further add to what Mr. Byrne has said, yes, with the nurses in particular, we've actually been working for the past, I'd say, 6 to 8 weeks with nurse leadership from different agencies, Public Health, GMH, Guam Behavioral Health, DOE. I've been working with their HR to try and get information. Yes.
Shane, if you can at least say Shane, your name, your position. Remember, first time introduction, then you're good to go. Thank you. Start all over, one more time.
Good morning, Senators. This is Shane Nata, Personnel Services Administrator, Department of Administration. Okay. So, yes, the nurses, we have put a lot of work into trying to look into it. In the past, as Director Byrne has stated, we've done comprehensive studies that took approximately 2 to 3 years to execute. The approach that we've taken and that the governor has instructed us to do is to look at properly customizing the pay plan to what the needs are. The needs are overwhelming for each profession. Nurses in particular, due to where they're employed, have a lot of intricacies for each department that we have to take into consideration. We did have a meeting with nurse leadership, and they did convey to us some of the major issues concerning compensation. Some of them are issues that they deal with compression, which we've seen before in other pay plan implementations. Others deal with those related to executive management positions, specialized positions, shift work, things like that. What we've been looking at is trying to use the CWA and all the laws that were put in place for nurses and healthcare professionals to administratively execute policies, differentials to address those. That's what we're looking at right now and trying to bring parity to the profession itself. We're looking at multiple options based on the feedback that we've gotten from nurse leadership, and also to aid in recruitment and retention of the nurses. The pandemic has really brought to the forefront a lot of the need and different ways actually for us to address that shortage. But I think we've made a lot of headway in the last 6 to 8 weeks, and as the director stated, we're working on a draft to submit to the governor within the week.
So just a reiteration on that, Shane. So, and based on Director Byrne's comment, is for the nurses' wage study, we're looking to giving a report to the governor's office within the next 6 days. What? Just reiterate what was.
Yeah, basically a report to summarize and give a recommendation to address those issues. Some of the issues a little more easier to address with current statutes and everything, but others might need a more strategic approach to the individual agency that they're impacted in. So.
Right, so that's within the next week, right? The next 6 days, right? Is what you said. Just wanted to get a clarification on that. Thank you. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown the need for digitization, especially in the hiring process. And I know that currently the Department of Administration accepts applicants via email. Are there plans to permanentize the digitization of this process with an online portal? I guess that would be for you, Shane, right?
Yes, thank you. And yes, there are plans. We're currently looking into our system and enhancing its capabilities. The pandemic did push us to do upwards of 90% of our processes electronically. So what we're trying to do is take what we've learned during the pandemic and transition that into our system. We want to increase our accessibility to both employees and the general public, which includes applying for jobs, but also giving employees more access to their records. So we're looking at, it's a pretty big endeavor to take on, but what we want to do is institute what we've learned over the past year and try and get it in place.
Maybe I want to add a question to that, Director Byrne. Based on this process and the need because of the changing times, has DOA looked into any of the ARP funding sources or any federal grants, EDA, or anything out there that could support the vision for DOA, which would be, you know, sustaining the operations for DOA? Any grant opportunity?
Yes, thank you, Vice Speaker. You know, we have a current DOI grant which is directed at the effort that we were making to catalog better our fixed assets, because that's a federal requirement. That was a $240,000 grant. We sought and got permission from DOI to wrap that up into the FMIS funding, because that process will be part of the new FMIS system. But yes, we're always looking for federal grants, but federal TAP grants are usually not very big, and that's why we kind of scrambled to get that particular funding. I think federal TAP grants generally come around $3 million a year, and you know, divided by 50 agencies, that you have to compete.
Thank you very much. My next question, Director Byrne, is processing periods for public safety recruitment has been a long time issue. And for some public safety agencies, their list can reach upwards of 100 of applicants. Has DOA made any efforts to address this? And how can we streamline the recruitment process for Gov Guam, especially for critical positions? I say that as recently as a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to the chief, and out of all the applications that were available at that time, if, for example, there was 50 applications, maybe only 7 or 8 of that qualified after going through the line. So my question to you is, have you made any efforts to address this and delineate any plan for us?
Yes, thank you. And if I may, I'm going to ask Shane to get into some of those details. But you're correct. It takes a long time to recruit for law enforcement, partly because it's a two-stage process. You know, the recruit has to go through what the basic recruitment processes the DOA has for everyone, and then the recruit has to go through the specialized process in the employing department, and those processes tend to take a long time. You know, and I'm going to ask Shane to talk a little bit more about that, but yeah, we are conscious of this. It doesn't help for us to have a whole lot of unprocessed applications on the books. It's difficult to manage, and it obviously doesn't achieve what the goal that we're trying to achieve. But Shane, please.
Good morning. Yes, the process in and of itself, a lot of our focus and attention has gone to GPD and DOC in recent months. DOC, of course, does have attrition that affects its ranks, but overall, we have made some strides in looking at which administrative processes within the testing branch that we can do to speed things up. For instance, you know, we did work administratively with the law enforcement agencies on the physical testing portion of DOA's testing. For example, we have some basic, we kept some basic parts of our physical tests, but things like obstacle courses and whatnot, we've reached out to those directors and chiefs to say when they fully implement and realize their PFQT within their agencies, we imagine that this is something that can be transitioned over to those agencies to incorporate in their academies. So basically, we break it down to DOA doing a written test and a basic quarter-mile run for some of these agencies. Recently, we have been able to assist the police chief in trying to fill his 15 vacancies for his cycle he's trying to put up right now. He's been collaborating with us almost every other week. We recently sent him new names that he can, I think he has 7 left to fill. So he's going through that process. We communicate with them as they go through their background check processes, which I understand they've made strides in making quicker as well. So we are cognizant of the additional processes on top of ours, and we try to align what we're doing with them. As far as DOC, they've actually been able to execute a pretty large promotional cycle this fiscal year, which was good for them, from the lower ranks all the way up to top brass at DOC. That's an accomplishment that kind of went, under the radar, basically, but they've made really good strides in reinforcing their current workforce. So we focus on those key agencies at those times to try and expedite what we can. Recently, we had the law passed to address certain things like the certification lists and whatnot. We're currently putting that policy on paper so that with future cycles we can go ahead and implement that. And I believe these were some of the long-standing administrative issues that the law enforcement agencies went through. And so we're going to try and formalize that, put it in place, so that once these bigger cycles come in, we can go ahead and try to move through them quicker with the agencies that are there. Currently, in looking at basic entry-level positions, typically we get customs and the fire department that have the most recruits. That's consistent this year as well. It was on a continuous announcement for a couple years. We recently closed it so that we can firm up the applicants that we have and start going down that process. Each agency has approximately around 1,000 applicants. We're trying to work with the agencies, fire department, customs, to see how we can handle this with their assistance as far as getting us logistical support to get all these things done. So they've been very accommodating. We've been talking about it. Now it's we just have to formalize what our plans and needs are and how they can assist us.
Appreciate that update, Shane. Next question, I know we talked about retirement earlier, but Director Byrne, we constantly hear about the wave of Government of Guam employees retiring, leaving agencies without critical institutional knowledge. How many GovGuam employees do we anticipate retiring? And is there a staffing plan to address this retirement? So I guess this would be not just for DOA, but for all the agencies.
Yes, Vice Speaker, thank you for that question. It is a concern. There's a very large proportion of DOE employees who are eligible to retire. Whether they retire or not is a matter of their choice. And departments have to speak with their retirement eligible employees to get a feel as to whether they're actually going to take retirement or not. I think in DOA we have 11 people who are eligible for retirement but haven't indicated that they're going to retire. So it's a little bit, agencies are challenged to be able to manage this process because it's entirely an employee choice. But you're absolutely right. We have to plan for that eventuality, and we have to make sure that the institutional knowledge that these senior and middle management employees have get passed down to the people that are going to succeed them, because we want, and this is really important to me, we want to get the best people we can into government service. We want to make it a career for people. We want to make sure that they feel that they can advance in government service. But at the same time, we can't promise them a position because we have a competitive classified system. So everybody who wants to move to a higher position generally has to compete for it. So we have to balance all these objectives. as far as DOA is concerned, we just have to, we've got our ear to the ground, and we try and make sure, and we've made especially in the Division of Accounts, which has a lot, the greatest number of retiree eligible people, we try to make sure that the knowledge that they have does get passed down. We made a deliberate attempt to do that, which I don't know that was there before, and I can't speak for the actions of each agency, but we have spoken to agencies about this, and we will continue to speak to them, because I think throughout the civil service, it could be as much as 13 or 14% of the number of employees that we employ are retirement eligible. So yes, you're right, we need to address it, and we will continue to do so.
That's something, Mr. Byrne, that I personally want to continue to work with, because we want to make sure that the institutional knowledge for those especially retiring, that somebody else has picked up the plate to be able to understand what the seniors, or I guess in our generation, the signers, those that are retiring, right? Some of them, if just recently hearing that in some agencies there are several employees who've had 40 to 43 years of service, and they're at their, they're doing it for the love of the job, and just to be to keep their spirits up, because they've stayed that long. But we know that is very, very critical, because we cannot afford to lose the institutional knowledge that's there, because we have had that happen to us in the past. You weren't here at the time, but it has happened. So yes. I want to continue to work closely with you.
Yes, thank you. And I would like to say that the younger employees that we have in the service generally are quick on the uptake, especially on technological matters. So I've been encouraged by that too, is that once you start to open up these tasks to them, they're usually pretty accomplished in achieving them.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I have one more question, if I may, and again to you, Director Byrne. In the past, DOA has eloquently argued for the imposition of administrative costs due to its processing of Government of Guam special funds. Along the same vein, DOA is charged with processing and accounting for nearly billions of dollars in federal aid. Given the enormity of that task and the resources you need to accomplish that work, is DOA permitted to charge administrative costs regarding these funds? If so, how much do you anticipate charging?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I think the answer is this, that DOA should be entitled to charge for those funds. We don't want to make it a big exercise, and because that would be just another task if we had to do minute calculations to determine how much DOA could be compensated for operating these special funds. But we have to make sure, please, that the budget appropriations allow us to do that. And at the moment, the budget appropriations really don't allow us to do that. And those that are charged with operating those special funds jealously guard their funds. So please open it up to us, at least for the bigger funds, and we will certainly be happy to comply.
Thank you, Director Byrne. Mr. Chair, I just want to say, in the efforts of this presentation being had, I just want to say I want to continue to work with you based on the questions and the inquiries I've asked for your team. I just want to say I see a couple of possible legislations to continue to help Department of Administration in their efforts, and I think we should continue to stay close, because providing you the resources that you need will make the Department of Administration run a little bit more smoothly, And we know that there are a lot of critical technical positions out there. After Gov Guam does the training and gives them all the tools they need to go, they're usually snatched up by somebody else greater than us, and especially with a lot of the different private contracts coming in. And so what we need to do is find that balance and give you the resources and tools that you need. So, Mr. Chair, thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask all these questions in Santa Mossy. God bless you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. That was a loaded list. Senator Tello, do you have any question? But right before you go on, you guys discussed the Hay study. What kind of bothers me is that you do a Hay study for Gov Guam agencies, but the autonomous seem to still borrow it and then keep going higher. It just bothers me. I'll get you to answer that later, but just think about that, okay? Senator Tello, please. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I too feel the same. Yeah, it's good comment there. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here this morning and providing your presentation. It's good to have this. I would appreciate it, Mr. Byrne. Your opening remarks was very good, and I could refer to that on some of my questions, but unfortunately, I don't have a copy of your remarks. But I appreciate if I could get one. It's very good when, after this is over, if I miss something, I can look at your remarks, and it was very thorough. I appreciate that.
Certainly, Senator.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, few people can read my writing, so that's why I do.
Okay, go. If it's handwritten,
Yes.
oh, I have a hard time even understanding when you do talk with your British accent. But yeah, if you can type it up, it's very helpful. It really is, especially when colleagues are not here. They could refer to it. So with regards to, I'm just going to try and go through as fast as I can. I'm sorry if I cut you off. I just want the answer. I understand you're doing the best job you're doing. Appreciate it. It's good to see Sean. He's back at DOA. That's institutional knowledge right there. If any questions I have, I know I can call in someone who's been there long enough to find the answers for it. So I appreciate him being back at DOA. It mentioned here that in the budget, it's $7.453 million was authorized in FY21, and your request is about $8,355,000, which is about I wish, right? 902,320 additional, almost $1 million more. And I don't know if you mentioned why that was. That for those employees that you talked about here, as well as that increase?
So thank you for that question, Senator. I mentioned in my remarks that last year our budget was, I hate to use the word shortchanged, but was effectively shortchanged by around about 700,000. It was a little under 10% of our budget. So we're starting from a rather low position before we even try to fund what we have now, and then try to fund what we're trying to do. So the budget that was submitted restores those cuts that were made last year, but we've also identified these additional needs that we're asking for this year.
And what are some of those cuts that you weren't able to do last year that now you're asking for to do this year?
Yeah, well, obviously we have made some progress recruiting at GSA, and Claudia will have an opportunity to talk about this later. We did manage to squeeze out enough funds to set up this internal audit department because it was so important that we have an internal audit department.
Set up what? I'm sorry, say?
Set up the internal audit department that we spoke about earlier.
Internal? Audit
department. But there are some contracts that we weren't able to fund, the biggest of these is how we deal with this records management. We're looking, and I'll ask Claudia to speak about this, we're looking at both how we deal with the old legacy paper records and how we're going to deal with the new electronic records, because we have to apply the same rules to electronic records as we currently do to the paper records. Okay. So what we did basically was squeeze out money from some of our special funds that we had accumulated money in, but it's empty now. We've used all those special funds.
I was going to ask, is there any money left?
No, we've used all those special funds.
Okay.
You know, so that's why we're asking for this two-step process to restore the cuts.
Mr. Byrne, can you please itemize it? You know, how much will the internal audit department cost, the additional money you want for that, and contract records management? Can you just itemize that $902,000 and how you're going to spend that? I appreciate it. If you can, just show us those costs that you're trying to.
If I may, we'll provide this to you in a more formal written way, but in broad terms.
Sounds good.
In broad terms, the internal audit department costs around about $150,000 a year.
Okay.
Mr. Byrne, any requests made by any of the senators, provide to the committee first, and we'll make sure everybody gets, okay? Because
yes, sir.
At the end of the day, this committee will be the one reporting out the whole budget. And I like the questions she's asking, so I want the information too, Ed.
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you. We'll make sure that we provide the chairman responses to your questions. But in broad terms,
feel free to CC me too when you send it to the chairman. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. And also, what is your estimated cost of this financial management system?
It's very hard to say, Senator, because we really don't know. It's a whole new venture. We've done what research we can, and obviously the greatest factor that determines what it's going to cost is how many modules you can actually purchase, or actually in this case we're not going to purchase them. We're going to use a in the cloud type system. So effectively we're going to lease them. But again, broad brush, we think it's going to cost about $8 million.
8 million, right? Yeah, that's what I figured. Okay, around that 8 or 10 million actually.
Yes.
Is what, okay, so that's good to know. Regarding the limited gaming fund, are you finding any major decrease in the limited gaming fund? And what does it, what does this money go, where does this money go to?
Limited Gaming Fund is one of those funds that gets spread to a number of agencies. Okay. We get a little bit of it. We get something like 10% of it, but because of the fact that this gaming has decreased, and a lot of these facilities were closed during the lockdown, that fund source has dwindled and almost disappeared. So the amount that we were going to get in the 2022 budget is under 100,000. Yeah,
it's very low, I think. I mean, you guys get about 84,000 to do the audit, but I don't see it going that way. Okay. And with regards to the Guam Claims Fund, in the past, it's been given about 250, and you know that it was increased last year. The Government Claims Act, was increased. So what is your suggested amount that should be put in this account? Because it does go under DOA, payment approved by the Claims Act. In the past, it's only been 250, but now it's up 500,000. So.
Yes, well, we're still operating in the current year where it's 250,000. We spent a little over half of that so far. Okay. Again, it's one of those funds that's very difficult to predict the expenditure on because it's so influenced by outside sources. It's outside people making claims against the government. Yeah. The Attorney General does a really good job of reducing the final settlements if that's how the settlement turns out to be. And I commend them on the work they do. They spend a lot of time and effort on that. And that keeps down the expenditure. But as we go over the next few years, I am sure there's going to be an increase in claims.
Okay. Yes, there has.
And one of the ones that we have to deal with is the sheeted funds that people suddenly find they were owners of, and then that becomes back through the government claims fund. So $500,000, seems to be a conservative amount to be considered in the future. If you look at some of the cases, lawsuits against the government, including some of them against me, the potential liability, were it not well controlled by the legal process, could be large.
Okay, thank you so much. The other one I have is what kind of shortfalls are you anticipating at the end of this year? And have there been any agencies that have not been allotted their allotments?
That's a question, Senator, that is best addressed to BBMR.
Okay.
We only have a kind of top view of the budget.
Okay.
Perhaps when you have BBMR before you, that might be a question
Okay.
that you wish to put.
Okay, fair enough. So what about, how much credit card fees has DOA paid out so far?
We've been paying out credit card fees since the governor's executive order in April of last year. It costs us about, well, it obviously depends on the volume, but the average is somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 a month.
A month?
A month, yes.
So how much have you paid out in?
So that's about, it's a little over 3.2 million is that we paid out.
Only in this fiscal year so far?
Well, in this fiscal year, it would be about 2 million.
About $2 million in fiscal year FY21?
Yes.
And then in FY20?
In FY20, it would be the balance, about 1.2 million.
1.2.
Yeah. It's
And how long will the Department of Administration continue to pay these fees?
the governor has authorized it through the end of July.
Okay.
She will take a decision as to how to handle it in the future, I'm sure, before then.
Okay, and
Its biggest, if I may, Senator, the biggest advantage to me is the ability for taxpayers to pay their obligations
Right.
without coming to a government office. We're concerned about exposure to pathogens. So the more people that pay this online, and that's where the bulk of the payments are, the better it is for our staff.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. There's a convenience to it, for especially those who are unable to stand in line, the long lines that are out there. But this funding that you've been paying out to these fees, are you getting that through ARP funding? Are you going to be paying that through the ARP funding?
Yes, we were getting it from CRF funding.
Okay, the CARES Act funding was paying for last year's and now this year?
For last year's, right. And this year's, we're looking at, yes, obviously, using
Okay.
federal funding because it falls fairly neatly into even the most basic definition of what the federal ARP covers.
Yes, so it meets the criteria.
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Byrne, July, we're still seeing an issue, especially at Revenue Tax and other areas. So if there's any possibility, to help our community with the ability to use credit cards, and not be charged that exorbitant amount, let's continue to do that. That's the part that we can do, and I'm hoping that you would encourage the governor to continue this, not to let it end this July. I mean, there is ARP funding to cover that, so I appreciate that if you would.
I was very pleased on May the 15th when individual tax payments were due. I went down a couple of times during the course of the day to look and see if there were long lines at Treasurer of Guam, and there weren't.
That's good, because they're going online and using the credit card. Yes,
that's what I attribute it to.
Yeah, I greatly appreciate that. And then, has there been enough funding for drug testing?
Yes, may I ask Shane to respond to that? Because
Sure.
he's responsible for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your question, Senator. Answer to that would be yes. Most of the agencies incorporate it in their budgets. So generally when they send us in a request for those agencies that do random drug testing, they've already worked out to the percentage of their budget that they're going to allocate towards it. And that kind of dictates how much drug testing we do within that agency. Okay. So yes, to answer that, yes. We usually don't have any issues funding the random drug testing for those agencies.
And you're keeping records of that too, right, Shane? Are you?
Yes.
Okay.
They transfer the funding over to pay for the drug testing. That's how it works. They'll request from us first, and then we'll determine the percentage within their agencies, and then we'll work out the costs associated to that.
Okay. Shane, since I have you right now, on average, how long does it take for an agency to fill a vacancy from the point they request it to filling the position?
It'll depend on the agency and the type of position. If we look at a few of the current ones, we're looking at, let's take public health, for instance. We've been working closely with them to address the vacancies at CPS. We've been pushing through a lot of our administrative processes. They've been conducting quite a few interviews. Whatever applicants we get, we basically get it out to them as fast as we can. So we leave it on a continuous announcement. So as far as evaluating applicants, depending on the number of applicants, if there's not that many, we can evaluate them rather quickly within a week. We do have some mandated timeframes we have to wait for, appeal periods, things like that. But outside of that, once we get the list over to the agencies, like Public Health, they've been pushing through interviews pretty quickly and responding to us with selections. Some of the issues we have in filling those is maybe due to the pandemic or various other reasons, depending on what agency is recruiting. A lot of the applicants will decline job offers. So basically it puts us in the department back at square one, where we have to pull in more applicants, evaluate more applicants, certify more applicants over. They do the interviews all over again. We've exhausted quite a few lists within the last fiscal year trying to get vacancies filled. So there is a concerted effort on both our end and the department's end. So to fill a vacancy, like for instance with the social workers, in a matter of 2 weeks we would have a name, let's say from public health, for a social worker, and at that point they'll convey to us they've selected them. Sometimes they'll accept the job offer up front, and then once we go through the onboarding process, the drug testing, they'll come back and rescind their acceptance, and then we have to go back to the drawing board and try and do it again. So it really varies depending on the position. For those positions that have multiple qualified applicants, laborers, trades helpers, things like that, usually what will dictate the length of time is outside of our processes, conducting interviews. So if you have 50 applicants you have to interview, they'll go through that process. We go through the administrative process of properly documenting anyone that declines an interview, things like that. Work through all of that. So relatively within weeks, once we're done giving them the list, that's how quickly we can do it.
Did you say roughly 2 weeks?
No, depending on the position, because some positions we only have 3 qualified applicants, and within a day a department will come back to us and say they all either declined or they don't meet their standards for what they want to hire.
So you don't think the holdup is DOA? It's just when the process and
it'll depend on the position. So case in point, on the other side of the coin would be law enforcement positions, right? That has a whole other set of processes attached to it. So what we're able to expedite on our end is different than what we're able to do for social workers, nurses, admin assistants, admin officers. But what we've been seeing a lot of is, because there's a lot of need within the departments for the same kind of positions, so they're all competing with the same list. So they're all interviewing the same applicants. So basically an applicant has a choice. If they may know of a department being better to work at than another for whatever reason or whatever they may have heard, they can kind of choose based on the interviews they go to. Well, I'd rather work over here because it's smaller, right? Less of responsibility and whatnot. So that's also occurring, and we try to move as quickly as we can with departments to get feedback. As far as evaluating, we've certified quite a few lists this past year, within this fiscal year, just since October. You'll see that the bulk of our certifications and recruitment has been with agencies like Public Health, Guam Behavioral Health, DPW, corrections, of course, for their promotions. So in a lot of those critical areas, that's where you'll see a lot of the certifications going out.
Okay.
And so coordinating with all those agencies at once to get them to properly, interview and select is kind of where it is. But it's been moving pretty quickly. I guess, we've tried to make it a lot quicker for the agencies and try to push.
Right, especially, you get a lot of people that are retiring, actually.
Right.
For some reason, this COVID has caused a lot of people to rethink
Yes.
their lives and wanting to say, okay, no,
Yes.
I'll retire now.
That's correct.
And we're losing a lot of institutional knowledge, too, at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad I know you're on top of it. It's very thorough what you explained, but if there's anything that we can do to help expedite some of these areas, it's definitely needed. A lot of things are held up because of the lack of individuals being able to sit on these vacancies. And Mr. Burns, back to vacancies that you mentioned earlier. Oh, no, it was asked. Never mind. You mentioned it was included in your budget for those particular vacancies that you had on your PowerPoint, right? Okay. The other question, Mr. Burns, is what is the value of uncollected or unclaimed checks issued by Government of Guam, and how old are these checks?
Okay, thank you, Senator. Most of the checks that are unclaimed at the moment are refund checks, and in particular, economic impact payment checks. We are publishing on our website, if not today, tomorrow, the unclaimed checks from EIP1, and then which are about to go out of date, so that's kind of important. And we're going to move on to 2 and 3. We do get a lot of these tax payment checks back. The reasons for that there may be many reasons for that.
Yeah.
I know even in my own mailbox, I got someone else's check, and that's not something that the government can control. So we're going to publish these checks. As for general checks, general vendor checks, it's very, very small because most of our vendors now are on EFT.
But what is the value so far of these uncollected checks? I mean, it's been a couple of years, I think, you already reevaluated for 2020, or has there been an audit regarding this?
No, there's no audit because they're just treated as outstanding checks. Again, if you add them all together, it's probably around about 12 million.
I'm sorry?
It's around about 12 million. If you add together all the EIP checks and the refund checks that are unclaimed, it's about 12 million.
12 million?
12 million, but some of those are fairly recent, right? Because EIP is going out now.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. That's a substantial amount. So I know it perked my oversight chair. Our oversight chair perked up real quick on that one. So, okay, it's good to know, too, you're also making a concerted effort to those individuals to pick up their checks. That's very important here. I'm glad you're doing that. You said tomorrow. That's excellent. Please do so because, like you mentioned, people getting these checks in the mail that doesn't belong to them. So find the rightful owner. With the status of the RFP or other efforts that may be in place to allow non-cash payments with fixed transaction rates, such as what is in place for the credit card payments made by GPA and GWA, what's the status on that?
You mean payments that we receive for GPA and GWA?
The RFP, yeah, for efforts made for to allow non-cash payments. In other words, I know that the government of Guam is already paying for these fees, right, for the credit card, correct?
Yes.
But are you having an effort put forward regarding an RFP on?
I understand.
Okay.
You're an RFP for merchant services.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir. Yes.
It needs to be issued. We will do so because it's it's one of the services that we get. The present arrangements for procurement of both banking services and merchant services predate me. They were somewhat blurry, I guess is the way I would put it. So we are looking at that. Our big focus, as I said, at the moment is on the FMIS system, and I really don't want to let my gaze wander from that, but we will move on to the merchant services and the banking services as soon as we can.
Okay, well, you have a female deputy director, and we're known for multitasking, so
Yes,
hopefully we can get this done.
DOA is known for multitasking.
Okay. Okay, the other one I have is for Claudia. Good afternoon, Claudia. Thank you for being here. With regards to the, or maybe this might even go to Mr. Byrne, but regarding the RFPs that are sent out, are all those who sit on the panel members for RFPs, do they have to take the 4 module courses at GCC before sitting on an RFP panel? Are they required to?
No, they're not, but I'll ask Claudia to respond.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Good morning, Claudia. My name is Claudia Kfardi, the Chief Procurement Officer of the General Services Agency. As it relates to requests for proposals, GSA actually doesn't handle the professional services solicitation. However, you would think that whoever is going to be involved in the procurement process of a solicitation is required actually to go through the 4 modules.
Okay. But you don't know if it's by law or anything like that? So there's no requirement, in other words, by law?
As of now, no.
And then there's probably no requirement for those individuals to also take an ethics course as well, right?
I'm not sure, Senator, on the ethics. But as far as, because your question is as it relates to the evaluation team, right? Like the evaluation
the
team.
panel
Yeah,
that
panel,
oversees the RFP, yeah.
Correct. Yes.
So, Mr. Burns, you were about to say something when I said ethics?
Yes, I know there's been some discussion, thank you, Senator, about whether every government employee should have an ethics training. And although generally I'm in support of that, we do have some short-term employees, and I've spoken to Senator Perez about this in the past. We do have some short-term employees that would be very difficult to ensure that they get trained, especially if they leave the government service. But in general, as we go through this, I personally am in favor of ethics training for everyone.
Yeah, I know that these 4 modules that might be very difficult for individuals. I mean, there are lots of RFPs coming out. There might be a long process to even get these people on board for that. But it's something we need to look into. Claudia, I've been getting a lot of calls, from agencies, and they're having issues with getting their procurement out through GSA, and there's always one excuse or another, or their calls are not even being answered or anything. So can you tell me, how long does it take to process these requests, number 1? Number 2, how many individuals at GSA oversee these requests, these procurement requests from agencies? How many people do you have on board to do that?
Thank you, Senator, for your question. Currently GSA has 4 buyer ones on board. We just recruited those in February, like our director just stated earlier. So we have 4 overseeing, the entire line departments and agencies at this time. And because maybe a few months ago, we were down to 1 buyer overseeing the entire line agencies and department, I had to think quickly on how I can get assistance in procuring, in executing these requests. So what I did was I actually delegated requisitions less than 10,000 for the departments to request for the quotations, to, again, do the process as long as they did the 4 modules. or even at least the 1 or 2 modules, as long as they're not conducting bids, the invitation for bids. So at least module 1 is the buyer they can actually do procurement for like a level 1, which is just getting the request for quotations. And sometimes you will find that the complaints coming in are actually departments that are complaining about their requisitions. However, that requisition is still within their department. Okay, so like they may be calling for, or complaining about a procurement process, but is actually being delayed by their own department. So for example, they'll call up, or let's say a director will call up regarding a requisition, a request. And, we look in the system again, we're automated. All I have to do is enter that request number, and it pulls up the status. So the status will say, still with the Department of, let's say, Public Health. And so then my response to the director is, it's still within your department. It hasn't been processed out. So I've actually farmed out or delegated out procurement less than $10,000 to be processed by the departments. Again, as long as their ASOs completed at least the 1 or 2 modules of the procurement courses up at GCC. So because we're in we have the procurement automated system.
Wait, let's go back then.
Okay.
2 modules, you mean you're allowing line agencies to be able to go ahead and go through their own procurement process under $10,000 as long as the individual in that agency has taken 2 of the modules at GCC for procurement?
Yes.
Okay, so that's 10,000. Okay, I just wanted to verify that because there's not a whole lot out there that's taken these modules in the first
Right.
place. So, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to verify.
So then what happens is, so then anything less than $10,000, the department's ASO and an alternate will actually go out and they'll solicit for the 3 quotes. Because the procurement system is automated, the approval still rests with me, the Chief Procurement Officer. So in other words, everything is uploaded into the automated system, which is our on-base document management system. I still review and approve the purchase orders that were processed by, quotes received and all that, the RFQs issued.
Even the one under 10,000?
Yes.
Okay.
So again, I'm doing that because again, we want to make sure that the audit, again, when we get audited, that yes, the procurement record is complete.
How fast are you be able to look at these requests coming in? Because it was one of my first questions is, how long does it take from the time of an agency requesting for procurement for you to hear it, review it, and approve it?
It all depends, Senator, because again, a lot of times vendors takes their
On
time
average.
to respond.
How about on average?
On average?
Yeah.
I'd say like, you mean on average of how quick?
I'm sorry?
What was the question?
On average,
On average, how quickly are they?
how quickly can these agencies get their procurement through?
On average, I'd say about maybe 70%, as long as the record is complete. For example, if they,
No, time period. I'm sorry, Claudia.
Like
It's my
7
fault.
days.
I should have said, how much?
7 days?
7 days.
Yes.
Okay, 7 days. 7 days. Okay. These certain agencies it's been almost 2 months for some of this, so I don't understand how that on average is 7 days to even come close to 2 months. So you're saying now that you have 4 individuals that are buyers now are considered, you call them buyers,
Yes.
right? Okay. And you had them since February of this year, February,
Yes.
March, April, May, so now with 3 months they've been into play. What is your backlog looking like? I mean, do you still need additional employees to help you get these procurements through in the average of 7 days? Do you need additional employees?
actually, we've submitted it like on our budget request, but it's again, 4 that is unfunded, right? Director
Yes,
Brown?
Senator, that's one of the items that we've asked for additional funding for, another 4 buyers. That was 190,000 in the personnel shortages that we experienced.
Okay. That you were talking about that you weren't able to take care of?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. Well, I hope it improves because You know, I'm getting calls in my office from these agencies, and I'm like, hey, you know, call Claudia, call Adelup, you know, to do a little push, or, you know, they're your fellow cabinet members, Mr. Burns, so I know you're doing everything you can, but if it is an issue with how many individuals are sitting there, right now you said you had one buyer for the longest time, and now you have 4.
Yes.
And this work is distributed equally so that you can do your best at getting them out, right?
Correct.
Okay, I hope so, because we can review those. Can we actually review those, how many reports are given to individual buyers? Can we review that information?
Yes, because it's system generated. But if it's not too much to ask, Senator, just so that you know the departments that are actually calling your office regarding this delays in procurement, if you just maybe email me, you know, just are there delays in these departments? Then I can, and I guess you can get a fair, you can make out a fair evaluation whether it's really GSA delaying the process.
Okay.
Because again, just like bids, you know, again, I always share with the departments, as we move as quickly as the departments move. So, you know, we turn questions and responses that comes in that are lodged by these prospective bidders. It takes time for them to respond. We can't move forward. It delays the procurement, but it's not really actually delayed by GSA. We can't move forward without the input of the departments.
I truly
so there's
believe,
a lot of, you know,
there's always 3 sides to the story. His, hers, and the truth.
Yes.
So when they do call me, I tell them to make a concerted effort to call GSA and find out what the holdup is. So I always make sure that, you know, before moving that. And if it gets really bad, you know, Claudia, I know your numbers, so I've called you in other circumstances, and I will do the same. But I greatly appreciate your work, and Mr. Byrne, you know, thank you again for being very thorough in especially in your presentation. I just wish I had a copy of that, you know, it would have answered a lot of questions. Thank you again, Sean. I appreciate all your answers too, and your help, and as well as to your Deputy Director. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Tello. And Mr. Ed, don't forget her answers. Share with us so we can all get it and we can move along.
Yes.
Senator Tony, do you have any questions or comments to the panel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to DOA for being here and presenting your budget request. I just have my colleagues have asked some of the questions that I had, but I just wanted to have a couple of questions here and then perhaps a follow-up. Director Byrne, will you be receiving any, or did you request any ARP funding from the governor?
Yes, certainly we requested some. Whether we get it or not is, as you know, the governor is reviewing all the requests now.
Yeah, that seems to be the common answer coming from the departments. But how much did you request from the governor?
I think that's something that, you know, we'd rather just talk to the governor about as to how much we have requested. It's not in this budget, it's something beyond this budget. So,
so you don't want to mention how much you requested? I mean, agency previous to you had mentioned what they requested, so I'm just asking. I mean,
well, okay.
Is there anything wrong with just mentioning what you requested?
Well, only that it's an ongoing discussion.
So then my intention here, then your intention, or the question is, are you planning or intending to use any of that ARP funding to hire personnel?
No, all our personnel are funded by either local funds, indirect cost funds, or a tiny little bit from the limited gaming fund. None of it comes from ARP.
No, I know none of it comes from ARP now, but
I'm
asking, are you
planning? We haven't asked for any ARP funds for personnel.
So you don't intend to use any funds for ARP funds for personnel hiring?
We have not asked for any, no.
But do you intend to? So the question is,
if somebody gives us some funds, we will certainly use them. But we haven't asked for ARP funds to support personnel. We're asking you, Senator. You know, we're up front. We need these funds from local funds to fund these positions, principally because we want these positions to be long-term. ARP funds only last until 2024. We don't want part-time people. We want people who want to make a career in the civil service.
Yeah, and that's why I'm asking whether, you'll be using any of that funds because of the fact that they'll be running out, and those that are hired under those funds, where they're going to be left at the end, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So, okay, I'm glad we're in agreement there. The other issue I had, I'm not sure if this is a funding issue or a procedure issue, the stipend for police reserve pay. Has it been a funding issue, whether they're getting paid on time or not, or is it a processing?
It's a processing issue. There might have one time been a funding issue. There isn't now. They're not big enough, really, to affect the GPD funds.
So when was the last, how far back are they now? Or are they caught up to date on their stipends?
I don't have that in my head, Senator. I know when I see that we're paying them late, I generally ask, why are we paying these late? I would like to pay these because I know it's important. Immediately after the month in which these volunteers are entitled to the stipend. But I'll let you know which was the last time we've paid. But I do look at it as it comes through, and if I find that it's late, I ask why, and it almost always is a process issue because GPD has to tell us who to pay. We don't know until we're told which of the volunteers actually met the hourly requirement.
Yeah, and that's so. The process of the GPD stipend, is the delay with GPD or is the delay with DOA?
Like Claudia just said, in all these processes, we rely upon information flowing from the agency to the department. If the agency doesn't tell us, first of all, it generally becomes an emergency because somebody says, oh, we haven't paid these, we need to pay them out tomorrow. And that obviously gets my attention. We will pay out, just like I mentioned in my opening remarks, we want to pay out everything that we have. We want to pay out vendor invoices, within 30 days of invoice date. We want to pay whatever is due, stipends or whatever else needs to be paid out. It doesn't help us if we don't have it because then we think the cash position is one thing and the cash position isn't because we've got these unknowns that suddenly appear. So DOA, I can assure you, will push them through as soon as we have them.
Okay, that's great to hear because we got GPD this afternoon, so perhaps I can ask them the same question.
Yes,
where
sir.
the delay is, if the delay is not, because the fingers keep going back and forth, so just want to make that sure. You mentioned about the EIP checks and that you'll be publishing it, and is that going to be published just on your website or also in the newspapers?
We decided just to publish it on the website because although the tax refunds statutorily have to be published in the newspaper, EIP doesn't. And we will make hard copies available for people down at Treasury of Guam. But it's so much easier to update it if it's on the website because as people come and collect their checks, we can remove their name from the list. And then we just get left with the people that really haven't got their checks.
So those without computer access or internet access, they're just going to be out of luck then, huh?
Yes, we found, Senator, that certainly over the last year, internet access has grown and grown. DRT has computer workstations there that people can access, and we certainly considered doing that ourselves. But the problem is with a list, if you publish it, is first of all, somebody has to buy that newspaper, and secondly, as I say, it isn't updated on as you get through the list.
Okay, I see. Thank you. You did mention about the RFP for merchant services and banking services, and that you'll get to it when you guys can get to it. And when do you foresee yourself getting to that?
Well, we would plan. We would plan to do it in the summer. You know, very often we get overwhelmed by new things that happen, because we're as you have noted, we're at the end of a very long line of people making decisions or taking actions. But all things being equal, we would get to it in the summer.
So by summer, we should be seeing an RFP out for
Yes, sir.
both. Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. That's good to hear. Mr. Chair, that's the only questions I have, so we can go ahead and go on to Senator Duenas. Thank you very much for your time here today again.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Duenas, do you have any questions or comments for the panel?
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chairman, and welcome Mr. Byrne and to the team here, Ms. Gaines and Shane, of course, Mr. Fadi. Yeah, just a comment in the beginning. I only have 2 or 3 questions. A lot of detailed information was requested. I think, Mr. Byrne, the reason why my colleague was asking you about the ARP funding, as I'm sure you're aware, you now have come before us and asked us for basically everything under general fund appropriation. Prior to that, we've had at least 2 agencies come in where large sums of money to the tune of $17 million and $10 million was actually proposed in their budget as ARP funding. And we caution, much like your comments of caution, that be careful with that, because certainly you are looking to sustainability within your department and agency going forward. And so you want to ensure that you establish that request via local funding request here. I noticed also, and I did enjoy your opening statement as well, I noticed you mentioned that from time to time agencies will be here, and the kind of communications we're having, are not representative necessarily of the reality of what Department of Administration is capable of doing. I certainly understand that. I've been on both sides. I would mention to you, Mr. Byrne, as I know that you've not only been here in this administration, but in a prior administration as well, that most of that function is handled via internal communication. And we can only do what we do. When agencies and departments come before us and they make their representations to us, we take that on face value, because that's, you enumerated very well in your presentation what your job is. Our job is to try to get through all of this, have a final appropriation that represents that, and then you're left with the arduous task of execution. But I would just mention that to you in my comments to you, that internal communications is much stronger than what we have here sometimes.
Yes, thank you, Senator. I can only wholeheartedly agree with you. And, if, just like Claudia said, if someone has an issue, it's better to raise it with us. They may not get satisfaction, and then, okay, they could raise it further. But we will do our very best within DOA to deal with the issue.
So just my 3 well, I don't know if they're even detailed, but my 3 questions, because of all the detail that was asked earlier, and I appreciate my colleagues for that, is, for the record, and as we go into the budget process, your request of approximately $1.3 million for your additional resources, and your deputy did a good job enumerating what the purpose of that is all general fund revenue request.
Yes, Senator.
Okay. The second question I have, and this is more for the record and everything else, and for the people that are listening as well, I've reviewed it, but all those vacancies you've requested are unbudgeted vacancies currently. None of them are newly created positions, correct?
Well, obviously the internal audit department, as I said, was stood up. I think the assistant personnel administrator is a new position, because we haven't had one. But the other 2 that we're asking, those particular we're asking for, are existing positions.
So the internal audit was, that's a long time planning tool that the Department of Administration had, right? So that
Yes.
would have been a kind of a carryover of what you were trying to do over. So now we have basically one position that is a newly created position to assist with the mandates that you've outlined.
Yes, that's true. And as some of your questions have highlighted, Shane has a lot to do, and I think he could do with the support.
Sure. No, absolutely. I know Shane is in fact, Shane, how long have you been back at Department of Administration? I know you were detailed out for a little while.
This month, it will be about a year I've been back at
Good.
DOA.
I know you're a hot commodity and certainly needed in the government, but I'm happy you're back home. Because between you and some others, in terms of my time, having served in the executive branch, I know your phone rings off the hook from us. and so I want to thank you for all that you do, and I'm glad you're back home.
Thank you, Senator.
So I guess my final question would be then, Mr. Byrne, that so we know of your general fund appropriation. We know that you're requesting it in that fashion. And my final question was, you have represented, along with Mr. Lester Carlson from BBMR, in this recent discussion on the ability to have a year now, which I'm very proud of all of us, of this $47 million surplus, that it had to do, and I'm asking agency by agency. For example, yesterday I asked DISID whether or not their budget request and their historical data that they put forward, was there any major changes in federal appropriations, use of money, if you will, under federal funds. And it was pretty nominal, pretty normal, with the exception of course, they had that difficulty with some of the expenditures during COVID, and that's very understandable. That wasn't marked as a increase or decrease. It was just we couldn't spend the money. It's carrying over, which is good. Would you be preparing a report? Because I think I'm just going to go ahead and put that in writing and request it, since it's a comment that was made that's very serious with yourself and Mr. Carlson. Would you be preparing a report for us so we can see what the differences were in the last fiscal year of the use of money, of federal dollars that were previously not being probably used to their maximum or possibly lost? And because I want to ask why. That disappoints me that we have a banner year. I mean, I'm happy that we had a banner year. But what happened in the past that wasn't happening? Could we get a report from you, Mr. Byrne, working with BBMR?
Yes, I'll talk to BBMR and we'll look at it. But if I could just point you to one figure that kind of demonstrates what we were talking about. If you go to the governmental funds page on the financial statements, it shows in intergovernmental funds and the general fund 17 million, which is something like, which is federal receipts, which is something like 10 to 11 million more than in the previous year. Unfortunately, with the type of financial statements that we have to produce under governmental accounting, it doesn't have a prior year comparison. And I agree that would be helpful, and I can certainly provide that to you.
Yeah, I know that.
The chairman.
Yeah, I know that my good friend Lester, from time to time, would let me know to exercise discipline when I read the CRER, because where you will find the devil in the details, if you will, is oftentimes in the notes.
Yes.
So
yes.
if you so that would be along the lines of a notation. That just off the top of my head, I'm thinking some of that could be awards, new grants, grants that for some reason didn't carry over for a prior year and then were reauthorized. So I appreciate the work. Don't get me wrong. I'd just really like to see a report so that we can understand that. And also, as agencies come before us, to remind them, please don't ever lose federal money. Regardless of the timing. I take my hat off to any administration that can, pound the table and go, this is the work we've done. But I've worked in many of these agencies. Those are career folks. And I know that they care about those dollars, regardless of who the governor is.
If I could just comment on what you just said, as far as agencies' recognition of the shift to federal funding from local funds, in each agency it may not be a huge amount, but when you add up the 50 agencies that we were talking about, that's what really brings about a noticeable accumulated total. But the big success was not getting new grants. The big success was making sure that any expense which might by default previously have been charged to local funds did in fact get charged to the appropriate federal fund, and therefore didn't have to be returned at the end of the grant.
So we should do a distribution then of all of that written down as a report to all agencies. Judicious stewardship of federal funds and ensuring maximizing to ensure that we can preserve as much local funding to help our people as possible. So job well done. Maybe some folks did it better than others earlier,
Yeah.
but I'd really like to see the delineation of that, and I appreciate you wanting to work with us on that. With that, Mr. Chairman, si Jus Masi.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. Senator Parrish and Senator Brown, you both came in about the same time. So Senator Parrish, would you have any comments or questions? And we'll say Senator Brown to close it up, pretty much.
Masi, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to the panel. So glad to see you this morning. So I just want to clarify some things in regard to the budget submission. So in the presentation that you had this morning in the GSA section, I guess this question is for Deputy Director Guinness. So it states, for GSA, the request is to hire an Assistant Chief Procurement Officer and 4 buyers. Is this in addition to what was previously submitted in the budget request?
Correct. This is the additional 4 buyers that we're looking for.
Okay, so in the sheet that we got today, I don't know if we received the summary. So in the original budget request for GSA, the request was for $923,597. And so I'm just wondering if this, the sheet that we got today hasn't been updated to include those additional 4 buyer positions and the Assistant Chief Procurement Officer. It still remains at, the total budget request still is the same.
Yeah.
Did you want to take
I'm
that?
not sure
Yeah, what
exactly what sheet you're referring to, but it hasn't been updated, obviously, no.
I'm sorry, say it again?
From the numbers you just read out, Senator, it's not been updated.
Okay, so what is the, so basically, so let me just clarify, how many, so I guess initially you were saying, Claudia, you were saying that you currently have 4 buyers? Is that correct? How many total buyers do you have on staff?
We currently have 4 on staff now.
4 staff,
So
okay.
we're
and-
requesting for an additional 4.
Okay, so, so that would, so what is the breakdown of the number of buyers as far as the position? So when I'm reading the staffing pattern, I see, yeah, it doesn't jive with what, so the organizational chart differs from what the staffing pattern says. So if you can just clarify what is on, who's on staff as far as the different positions.
Claudia, do you have that?
So currently we have 4 buyers on board, Senator.
So as far as
4.
buyer 1, buyer 2, supervisors,
They're all buyer ones.
all buyer ones?
Yes, they're all 4, there's 4 buyer ones and 1 buyer supervisor on the procurement section. So we're requesting for 4 additional buyers.
Okay, and would they all be buyer 1s or as well?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Even with that addition, is that sufficient to handle? Because I'm looking at the workload that you guys have accomplished. In the past 2 years, so from 2020 to 2021, I'm sorry, first of all, in FY2020, GSA processed 11,834, according to what was presented, different procurements, at a total amount of 141.9 million. And then in the following year, in 2021, the anticipated level increased 9% So now we're looking at 13,039 procurements at a total amount of 156.6 million. And then this coming fiscal year, it's increasing another 9%, so a total of 18% change in a matter of 2 years. So the total estimated would be 14,368 procurements with 172.8 million. So considering that, you know, in your testimony today, you were saying you were even down to one buyer during this year, and you just recently got 4 buyers. Considering the 18% increase in these past 2 years, is that the amount of buyers that you have currently in your proposed budget, is that sufficient to handle the increased workload?
Actually, a comfortable number for GSA would be at least 12. You know, we normally had 12 buyers, but as they retired, you know, like I said, some passed away. We were never able to recruit those buyers, but 8 is sufficient enough for now, because again, we're looking at, you know, what we can at least improve on the personnel or the support side of the procurement section. However, if this body can actually allow us to recruit, you know, a total of 8, that's a real, I mean, we're home free when we get to that number. That previously was our number in the past, but we can make do with 8. Taking a look at the, you know, past history, how we can handle things. We can still handle it, but a comfortable number would be 12. Yes.
Okay. In the organizational chart, I count maybe 14. So really, the staff level should be even higher. I mean, that was even before, you know, the pandemic, I think. Is that correct?
Before the pandemic, yes. Like I said, but as they retired or vacated the positions, you know, they were really not recruited. They were not replaced.
Okay, yeah, so that brings to another question. I think I want to reiterate the sentiments of my colleague that regarding successional planning. So there definitely is a shortage in the mid-category level. You know, to what extent do you need buyer 2s? I know you were saying earlier that buyer 1s help with the requisitioning process for the different line agencies. You know, right now in your staffing pattern, I only see 1 buyer 2, or currently you don't have a buyer 2, you only have a buyer 2 supervisor?
That's correct. We have no buyer 2s on board. We actually would like to take a look at, again, you know, progressive promotions. For example, we can actually groom the buyer 1s to move them up to 2s, you know, to make sure that they fully understand the magnitude of the invitation for bid process.
Okay. And so that would require also training, right? Because according to law, they would have to have taken Module 1 and Module 2. Is that in the budget to, is that provided in the budget to have successional planning occur in that way?
Actually, on the training for the procurement modules, we have our special funds, which we normally use for the you know, the operations of GSA other than personnel.
Okay, because yeah, I don't see that in the proposal today. I mean, I only see general fund requests. Perhaps that could be there could be a supplemental budget showing that. And what the source of the special funds? Where is that coming from?
Our surplus bids, very minimal, but enough to carry on, you know, to pay for the training. But it's not an exorbitant amount. It doesn't ever reach $500,000.
How
so
much?
It's very minimal.
How much is that, if you can provide?
On the special surplus funds, maybe it doesn't go over $50,000.
Okay. And are you, sorry, Director Byrne, have you looked into utilizing indirect funds in helping out with GSA?
Senator, the indirect funds are already used by that we get at DOA are already used by certain employees, or they're there to pay certain employees in the division of accounts. because that recognizes their involvement in federal processes. And if I could just add to what Claudia said, purchasing is only part of the cycle, as I mentioned in my opening remarks. The increased throughput that we expect to get in purchases means increased throughput in receipts and increased throughput in payments. So, the other divisions in DOA are also faced with higher transactions. Our answer to that is to better use technology, and that's one of the pressing reasons why we're pressing so hard for the FMIS system, because current paper-based, and I try to tell all my correspondents, don't send me paper, send me an electronic message. Our current paper-based system, and we still get quite a lot of paper, doesn't lend well to economies, and certainly economies of scale. And so, whereas we are faced with this increased throughput, I believe we put forward a budget that's responsible, and it's something that we can say we really need these particular resources. We haven't, as Claudia just said, we're recruiting buyer ones because we have to start somewhere. We actually haven't had a lot of success in recruiting buyer twos. So our response obviously is to recruit buyer ones. So I think we're being as responsible as we can with funding, but equally well we are promoting as much as we can improved technology to achieve some of these increased throughputs that you refer to.
Okay. What about the retention plan for workers? Because yes, I understand the savings that technology can have, but also, there seems to be a consistent pattern where there is a lack of mid-level buyers. And in looking at the pay scales, have you thought about reclassifying so that they gain parity compared to, let's say, the autonomous agency buyers? Oftentimes, I think there's a movement, obviously, out of agencies for higher pay. Is there any conversation regarding reclassifying these buyers so that they can be retained for a longer period of time?
Yes, Senator, I've submitted to the Human Resources to Shane, Mr. Shane Nagta, who's currently reviewing some, requesting, we submitted a request for reclassification of these positions. Buyers actually are outdated as of now, so we're trying to get it reclassified maybe to purchasing agents or purchasing specialist positions. So he's right now currently reviewing our request at this moment.
Okay, great. And is that going to be close to what these autonomous agencies are paying their staff?
We're looking at a little bit above, because again of the magnitude of the volume of work that we do compared to them, and we know that the autonomous are specialized in the tasks that they do. However, with the oversight of GSA, we deal with medical equipment, we deal with pharmaceutical supplies, so we want to be technical. We also deal with fire apparatuses, for example, fire trucks, ambulances. So we can't, again, the autonomous agencies, and most of my time I spend is with autonomous agencies. So I frankly know, they're specialized in like turbines, GPA, and cranes for the ports. But it doesn't say that GSA, the buyers at GSA, they don't have these specialized field, or they don't work with these specialized equipments, because they do, we do. Okay, we deal with specialized equipment such as, like I mentioned earlier, the fire apparatuses. We look at forensic equipment. You're talking about specialized knowledge. We do have to invest in that we also get ourselves educated in procuring these kinds of specialized equipments. So that is why we're looking at pay scale, we're looking at a little bit above autonomous because of the volume of work that we do, and also the different specialized equipments that we procure for this government.
Okay, thank you, Claudia.
So thank you for raising that point, and it came up a bit earlier about the comparison of pay scales between the Central Civil Service and autonomous agencies. And to me it is a concern. As Claudia mentioned, DOA and some other agencies have to deal with a whole variety of technicalities. Whatever is thrown at us, we have to process well, and that's been particularly true in the last few months, where due to the pandemic we've been buying and using many different things that we previously didn't have to. As far as the comparison with autonomous agencies, autonomous agencies get the same benefits that those who work in the Central Civil Service do, but sometimes they are rewarded higher for doing a job which is either the same job or even, as Claudia mentioned, maybe a job that isn't quite so demanding. It's one of the things that we're looking at when we come to look at this competitive wage issue, because nothing could be more competitive than your own competitors. We don't want to lose good people from the Central Civil Service to autonomous agencies simply because they reward people at a higher rate for doing the same job. That's not good personnel planning. So it's one of the things we'll be looking at globally, as well as what Claudia mentioned as far as procurement is concerned.
Morning. If I could just add to a little bit what our director was stating. And yes, they both conveyed a message. And, in comparing line agency positions to autonomous agencies, it's well known that the autonomous agencies do have the statutory authority to be where they're at. I think that's not in contention of where it's at. It's the gap, I guess, we're looking at between the autonomous agencies. While we look at global positions, I just want to speak specifically to DOA, right? A lot of the challenges that we have as an agency is administratively, if any of the line agencies and departments may be weaker in any avenue of procurement, human resources, or accounting, we kind of step in to try and fill the gap so that the agencies can move forward. This has caused strain on the divisions to go ahead and move forward with our main mission. So trying to analyze DOA positions separate of others, right? A lot of the centralized authority for personnel, procurement, accounting lies with DOA. So when we look at DOA positions in particular, and Director Byrne has asked me to really study DOA positions, right? It's something that we take into consideration as far as the scope of what we deal with, right, and the depth. So for procurement, yes, it's been a long time since the positions have been looked at. So as far as salaries are concerned, our goal is to try and bring parity for those positions, right, in the autonomous agencies and line agencies. But also we remain fiscally responsible with our own agency and our budgets, right? And our department has to serve as kind of the model for that fiscal responsibility internally. So that's where our difficulty is at. Because I would like to recommend, and say, hey, GSA positions should be paid, as high as we can. But at the same time, as Director Burns said, we look at it globally and try to balance out our recommendations in line with everything else and all the laws out there. So I just wanted to put that on the record, that it is a difficult task and not as easy as to just peg a certain salary and say, hey, we'd like to pay the buyers this much starting pay, but we try to balance everything out in our recommendations.
Yes, thank you for the responses. And I guess this is the reason why we're having this conversation, because we're in the middle of a budget hearing, right? And, this is something, I've said many times, we need to hire more buyers. And, just hearing your testimony, Chief Procurement Officer Claudia, you need 12, right? That's what you're saying. 12 is a good number. So I think that maybe perhaps resubmitting, I would suggest, requesting more buyers at this time, because right now what you have here is a proposal of additional 4 buyers of 190, that would cost $190,000, right? And we're, the FMIS system would cost $8 to $10 million. I think maybe perhaps the investment in personnel is the critical need right now, because, you know, that would end up being the bottleneck. You know, you can have a really good system, but who's going to be operating it, right? And, you know, to rely on, you know, and like you know, until you get the retention plan down, you know, we might be facing the same situation where you'll be reduced, your personnel may be reduced at a time when there's so much demand. So I think there should be a supplemental budget to ensure that the buyers, that funds the buyers that you need. And I would suggest, you know, the 12 that you'd mentioned. And then going on to contractual costs. So in the budget that was submitted, in the very first page is a summary, and the authorized level last term was higher, so it was at $519,453. This year's budget request is $410,316. In the supporting documents, I don't see any breakdown of the contracts. Perhaps Director Byrne, can you explain why there's a decrease, considering the intention of purchasing a FMIS system? Are you not anticipating that this additional system is not going to require more needs, budgetary needs?
Thank you, Senator. The increase is only partly due to the FMIS system. As I mentioned...
Just a clarification, it's a decrease from last year. There's a decrease in the budget submission.
Yes.
So you're saying the decrease is due to this purchase?
Yes.
Oh.
I mean, we don't have to maintain... As I mentioned previously, the intent in acquiring this new system is that we're not acquiring any equipment or anything that needs to be maintained. We're acquiring a system that we have access to in the cloud, like most systems are now, so there's nothing to maintain. So we don't ask for things that we don't need, and we would expect to deal with all that in the acquisition cost.
In regards to this FMIS system, so are you proceeding with the emergency procurement or RFP?
RFP.
Okay, so this is not emergency procurement.
It is to me.
But the method of selection is RFP.
The RFP follows the emergency provisions in the executive order.
Okay, and then in the letter that I sent a letter to your office, and you'd mentioned that staff is going to be on the panel to decide, and but who's going to be the one that's going to approve the procurement?
We haven't decided that yet. We haven't got the RFP out, so we will do that as soon as we get back from the Attorney General. It'll be a team like any other procurement. Who is going to evaluate the bids?
Okay, so I mean, just public law requires that the head of the procurement must have completed the 4 modules. Is there anybody on staff that has completed all 4 modules?
As I responded to you, the person dealing with that procurement has completed 2 modules.
Okay, but that's shy of the 4 modules.
No, that's correct.
Yeah, so according to law, that person would have to have all 4 modules. Do you have anybody who's going to approve?
That's perhaps what makes it an emergency, Senator.
Even regardless, whether it's emergency or not, that person would is mandated by law to have all 4 modules, whoever makes this decision.
Well, there isn't any, and we will just have to deal with that situation when it arises.
Yeah, we're talking about $8 to $10 million. I think, yeah, maybe we'll follow up with this discussion. Yeah, and as far as determination of need, in the current law, It states that, so the law that was passed last term, it requires the determination of need. Has Department of Administration provided that to the Attorney General's office?
Of the FMAS thing?
The determination of need, so
Yes.
it's an RFP, but
Yes.
you're considering it
We
as an
have.
emergency RFP. If it is through an emergency procurement, have you provided determination of need?
Yes.
Okay, can we, if you can provide the body, or at least the committee of that?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your last part of the question, but we have provided the entire RFP requirement to the Attorney General.
Yeah, but the question was that for any emergency procurement, you need to have a determination of need. So justifying the reason for an emergency. But I think two things are being conflated here. RFP is very different from emergency procurement. So again, maybe this is why we really need somebody with the training to carry out this procurement.
We're dealing with a hybrid here, Senator. We're dealing with an RFP because we don't want to exclude anybody, but it is being purchased under the, not the legal emergency procurement that you see set forth in legislation, but under the executive order emergency procurement.
Okay, that doesn't exist in law. I've never heard of a hybrid RFP emergency procurement. But I understand what you're trying to say, but there is no hybrid that exists. So the American Rescue Plan money has DOA, or maybe this question's for Claudia. Have you reached out for assistance to use any of the ARP funds?
Senator, that would come from me, and
Okay.
I already answered that question.
Okay, so then I can ask you then.
Senator Duenas.
Yeah, so have you proposed any, have you reached out to request any funds for the ARP?
Well, I already answered that question to Senator Adder and Senator Duenas. It is, as far as personnel is concerned, that's not a sustainable process, because we want to keep people longer than the ARP funds are available. So we chose not to try to recruit personnel. It's not, we don't have...
Yeah, the question was actually broader. What requests did you make for ARP funds? I didn't say for personnel. I said, what requests did you make for the ARP funds?
Well, as I answered, Senator, I'd rather not. It's a matter at the moment between the departments and the governor. We're in the middle of a discussion, just like any other budget discussion, so we haven't reached a conclusion yet.
Yeah, I think that's unsatisfactory because, we're dealing with appropriations, and if there is funding that's going to come from the ARP that can fund some of the things that are on the budget, I think it's appropriate to ask this question.
Yes, and I responded, Senator, that the bulk of what we're asking for is personnel which we didn't think was a sustainable request from ARP funding.
Okay, so I think, that concludes my questions, and I do appreciate your responses. I do look forward to an additional supplemental request to help fund, these critical positions. We're dealing with an 18% increase over the past 2 years of procurement. And, everybody in government is relying on this agency to get them processed. And considering you were down to one buyer during the time crunch, I think that's, I don't know how you were able to manage, but yeah, definitely there is a critical need for staffing. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Byrd. Senator Brown, do you have any questions or comments for the panel?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your continued enthusiasm through wading through some of these very long, belabored questions that have happened. I don't have my list of questions from my staff for me to ask, so I guess I'm going to have to ask my own questions, if you don't mind. I have a slightly different view on this, and I hear, Senator Sabina's comments with regards to simply give us a supplemental budget, and I'm very much concerned that we're in a time that while we have considerable federal funding come into Guam, that's not going to sustain itself. And anything we do during this time is going to increase the overall cost to running the government of Guam as a concern, and certainly, Mr. Byrne, in your respective position at DOA, I'm sure you've always seen in the years you've been there the challenges of simply ensuring the revenue is there to pay for all the obligations of the government, because that ends up knocking on your door and coming through your respective offices. So I have a very different take on that, Mr. Chairman. And while we've had these increases in procurement as a result, I'm assuming related to the pandemic and what we've experienced, we also have to be a bit cautious that we're not simply adding on at this time without a guarantee that in a year or 2 or 3, that the government of Guam is going to be able to sustain the revenue that we're currently experiencing. Because as I've said time and time again, we're living in a very artificial time economically. On our own, I'm going to be very concerned in the next year if the federal funds, and when they do stop, and it will stop at the level it has related to this pandemic, that we may not have, essentially have our economy revived to a level of where we were in January of last year. And that's a challenge. So I'm a little more cautious about this expectation. I'm also concerned about the continued view of growing the government of Guam. That there's simply an idea that we're not as effective and efficient because we don't have enough people. Employees need to have good, healthy environments. I'm sure Ms. Safaji knows that at GSA. I'm sure it's not simply related just to, we don't pay enough, we don't do this, we don't do that. I mean, people need to have good, productive environments to work in. And maybe they move on to other opportunities. That's life. People retire. I mean, I hear this discussion today about, we don't have succession plans, and, X amount of people are going to retire this fiscal year. Well, they retire every fiscal year, and I'm sure Mr. Shane knows that. There's nothing new about that. There's nothing creatively different about this year versus any other year. That's the normal course of life, of having people retire. So that's nothing new. I'm not, wow, we got all these retirements. We don't have a success, please, the government of Guam ran years before we showed up. Anyone here showed up. So I don't look at it the same way or weigh those issues the same way. But I caution that, Senator Atta had brought that question up, and I'm very happy to hear, Mr. Byrne, that you're not looking at increasing personnel on this CARES funding that's coming in, because we've had government agencies that have come before us to relay exactly that they're looking at using this very temporary funding to start bringing more personnel on board. And that does concern us because, again, I mean, we can bring everybody on and have a great big party, but our ability to sustain paying those bills when they come, and those times will come. So I appreciate your input with regards to that. And I do want to ask, Mr. Chair, probably as we look at this budget, I'm sure you've already considered this, but maybe that's a standard question that needs to be put to every government agency that's coming before the legislature, because if there's an expectation that we're going to continue to keep adding personnel to the government of Guam without ensuring long-term ability to sustain paying these people, I think that's a disservice to those employees that are being hired, and a bigger disservice to the people of Guam that we're expecting them to continue to pay a larger and larger cost every year for the operations of the government. So I have a very different perspective of looking at this, particularly during this time. I mean, what constraints have we put in place? Almost nothing. What are we retracting back? Everything's, let's just continue to expand and expand and expand. And I think we're asking more of our taxpayers to carry a burden because, the money doesn't come out of the sky, and we know that. It doesn't come out of the sky. So I just want to comment on that because I don't think we all share the view here at the legislature that we're simply going to, just ask us what you want and we're going to fund it. Because I'm very concerned. I really am very concerned about where we're going to be a year or two from now, and will we be able to absorb it? And will our local economy with our private sector, particularly with our tourism industry and all the support businesses that are connected to it, are they going to be up and running at a level that's going to help support this government and fund this continued cost that we want to add on? Shane, you had mentioned earlier, and I'm happy to see you back at DOA. We were a little concerned a couple of years ago when you were sent up to public health. And you were sent up to public health before this pandemic, so I can't say that's the reason why. But we have a lot of respect for your expertise, and we're very happy you're back at Department of Administration. You had mentioned with regards to the issue of drug testing, I know that was asked by one of my colleagues a little earlier. What is the status of drug testing? Because we had the chief of police here a few weeks ago, and we were very, very surprised and taken aback when he relayed to us that really there was no consistent, and has not been any consistent testing in the Guam Police Department. So far, he's relayed that, everything's turned out negative, which we're happy to hear so far in their testing program. But it's really brought to light for us that there really is no consistent implementation of drug testing within the government of Guam at a time when we have such a major drug problem on this island, which concerns me and I know concerns many people, because a lot of the crimes that our residents are being impacted by is almost always, you trace it back to the source related to drug crimes on the island. So what is the feedback you're getting? Well, funding, that's great, but how consistently is the funding being used in the government of Guam, and how consistent is drug testing being implemented government-wide in the line agencies?
Thank you for the question. Predominantly, a lot of our drug testing efforts revolve around the law enforcement and public safety agencies. And, yes, as budgets allow, they do coordinate with us based on funding levels. But as a proactive measure, looking at the program in totality, yet there could probably be more aggressive efforts being made. Part of what we do is when we go through the process with an agency, it does take some planning, right? As you know, typically when we do a random drug test, of course it has to be completely random, so we got to ensure that that line of communication is held and scrutinized and maintained so that it goes off without any complications. Recently, actually, I just had this discussion with our director. We've seen a lot of activity as far as agencies looking toward being more aggressive in their random drug testing efforts. I can't discuss which agencies, of course.
Sure, that's
but
fine.
there has been an uptick in the past, absent the pandemic timeframe, right? Yes, our focus has been mainly on law enforcement agencies. In regards to GPD, after the hearing, the police chief called and said, "Hey, man, can you help us out? I mean, this is kind of what we want to do. Yes, we haven't done drug testing, but let's get it going." So we actually did push aggressively to get the program up and running. So we reached out. In the past, we've had different approaches to this. A lot of what has happened was agencies now absorb the costs into their budgets, so they can shift it around where they need to. Other approaches have been, allocating money to DOA, so we can schedule the randoms at the departments, and we control when that's done. Both approaches work to an extent, depending on, I guess, what the target is as far as agencies that we want to drug test in. So in the past, DOA has been appropriated upwards of $40,000 for random drug testing, right? Which seemed to be a good amount for us to have it regularly done on a quarterly basis through the various agencies that we cover. That was spread out, I think, to the agencies, depending on if an agency in a previous fiscal year just onboarded a lot of recruits. Of course, the population size in their departments went up. So that had to shift around how much money needed to be done. So both approaches work. The pro about allocating the money straight to DOA is we can control when those agencies are tested and we can coordinate with them. Otherwise, agencies, these agencies are busy, and yes, it is their mandate to make sure that all of their officers and public safety officials are on the up and up for drug testing. But a lot of times, I think if the money is directly with us, it helps us to remind them and say, hey, it's second quarter of the fiscal year. I think you guys are up. Let's start the process, and we can actually execute it on our side a lot quicker. But both approaches do work. Just how quickly we can get it done is contingent upon where the funding is at, not so much the funding itself.
Do you have a listing on an annual basis of just how many tests are done in the government of Guam and the line agencies? Do you keep track of that?
Yes, we do.
Is that something you could provide the committee, at least, I don't know, pick the last 5 years in all fairness, 5 or 6 years?
Straight numbers, yes, we can provide that.
Yes, I think it would be good to know, and just simply because we're finding such incredible inconsistency. I mean, for the Chief of Police of the government of Guam, I appreciate his initiative to follow up on this issue now, but for him himself to say, gosh, it's been so many years since he himself as a police officer. Yes. And I recognize that the focus primarily is in designated positions because of their respective duties and some of the work that they do. We don't want them to be a harm to themselves or others, so we recognize that. But to find that there's such big gaps in the rest of the government of Guam is bothersome, again, at a time when our people are really experiencing the adverse consequences of considerable crime in this community that primarily is drug-related. We should be taking every step to ensure that all our public officials, all government employees, to me, are public officials, are being responsible in the work that they do for our community. I mean, they're being compensated by our people. I think we expect them to show up to work and be drug-free, at least of illegal drugs that are plaguing our community. Thanks, I appreciate that. And Mr. Burns, I mean, this issue with regards to your financial management system, I don't think anyone has a great issue here in the legislature about your procuring it. We understand the need for the system, a new system, because of how antiquated, and those of us who have been around long enough with the old system recognize that. I think it was just an issue of ensuring that it was properly procured, because we do have those questions. I'd like to think we live in an ideal world and everything's done above board and there's no deals that get cut. But I'd be naive, and I've been in this government long enough to know better, and I've been on both sides of the aisle to know better. So I think that was the main issue. I think if it's done properly, and while I understand it's a sense of urgency, we just want to make sure it's properly procured, because whoever the company is that eventually we procure this equipment from, I mean, we're going to have a nice lifelong relationship with them in the maintenance. It's not just the initial purchase, it's continued relations, and we've seen how previous companies in this government have, continued to benefit immensely because they essentially hold the key, so to speak, to the operations of these equipment. They sort of have us hostage once we procure their system for the lifetime of that system, and some of the biggest bills we see are, to these companies, and rightly so. I mean, if they provide us a quality service, we need to pay for it, but sometimes you wonder, because they do hold us hostage, are we being charged a fair price, or are we being, extorted?
Yes, you're absolutely right, Senator, and that's one of the reasons why we decided to follow the path of including the Attorney General in the process. And the Attorney General, because that's their job, will make sure that we follow all the rules that we need to follow. And we take their advice, obviously, because they're lawyers. But, financial management, is my core expertise. Mm-hmm. So I have a pretty good concept, because I've done this before, of what core processes we need to have in the FMIS system. Mm-hmm. With the legal expertise and the expertise of myself and the other people in the Division of Accounts who've also had to deal with this system over the last few years, some of whom have come from other places that had more up-to-date systems, especially, as I mentioned, some of the younger people. We will get the best system that fits our particular needs, because governments are different. It's not like that you can just buy QuickBooks and run your financials as you can for some businesses. Governments are different, and some of the things that are missing from the current system, which have come up in audits and findings, we will make sure are included and comprehended in the new system.
Well, and we look forward to that. Again, I mean, we're hopeful the process is done properly and it's all above board. We're all good, because the ability to have an updated system also will allow us to access information as we need it, rather than, a long review process. I mean, I'm sure there are all key information that we're going to want to be able to access, and you can just simply press a button or two and produce that. I think we're seeing our community's expectation of greater transparency and shining that light as brightly as possible. Sometimes it's blinding for those of us that have to work under it, but it encourages our government to act more responsibly and accountable with regards to how public resources are being spent. So I think we can all come to an agreement with regards to that.
Yes, transparency and timeliness, because outdated information.
Yes,
is
and sometimes useful. By the time we get it, it's not timely and it's not as useful. So
we've made a big step by getting the audit out a month earlier than we normally do, and we're going to keep on doing that so that we do get this information out. And then once the audit's out, then we can devote our attention to other things like getting this FMIS system.
Yes, and I think we all appreciate that. I appreciate your input with that. I know the Oversight Chair, Senator Sabina Perez, is going to be holding an oversight with regards to GSA procurement, so I'll reserve my questions for that time, because I know, Mr. Chairman, it's been a long morning. I appreciate the fact that all our people here from DOA have been patient over the last few hours. I mean, we're kind of used to sitting for this length of time. Most people are not. You know, sometimes you feel like you're in the line of fire. Every time you turn left or right, there's 10 million questions coming your way. So I appreciate your patience this morning and participating in this hearing. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the opportunity to ask my questions.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Mr. Byrne, and basically to all the whole panel. Staffing pattern, you got to propose, you got your current, and I know one of my colleagues brought it up. For GSA, you only got 2 buyer ones. Update the proposal. So when you say you want 4, make sure you got 4 positions listed. I mean, I can pull up the document, so we're not going to debate that, okay? I know that the CFO exists. I saw that. I just double checked it. I know the assistant PS personnel service is there. It's right below Ken Boris' former position. The CFO was formerly Ms. Kagi. You know, I did my homework. I'm just saying, I'll be like, just fix it so we can work with you.
Yes, thank you. We'll update it. I think the deputy's got that sheet, and we'll work on that.
I know Bernie's looking up here like, okay, she knows where I'm coming from. That's all I'm asking. Just update it. My concern on the personnel side, and you know when you talked about GPD, DOC, are there any pre-qualified process they could have done? You know, let's do things smart. Do like what the military does. You know, when you're in your junior year in high school, they got letters going out saying, hey, you want to join the Army and join the Marine? I'm concerned that GCC has the Balea program, UG has the criminal justice program. Are any of those folks being approached by all these law enforcement people saying, hey, if you qualify, if you graduate, let's pre-qualify you. You know what I mean? Because the drug test happens only when you're selected or considered. But at least be pre-qualified so that you're not waiting at the end saying, we have an emergency requirement for police officers. You've always need police officers. You're always going to need buyers. You're always going to need a bunch of folks that are going to school that could pre-qualify for a lot of government agency positions that folks are retiring or resigning. Okay, and I'm just concerned that there appears to be no effort to recruit the folks that are graduating from schools. Graduating from GC, they got a certificate, graduating from UG, and so forth. And then on the same note, I brought up the issue about the pay study. What kind of bothers me is that GovGuam does a pay study. The autonomous agency to borrow that paper. Then they say, you know what? We're going to hire an administrative officer and pay them more so we can, I'm not going to say this too bluntly, so we can steal them from DOA or from wherever and hire them for waterworks or GPA. But it's happening. Okay, it's happening. And I'm just concerned is that you do the pay study, we spend a lot of money on recruitment, training, and so forth, but there's no mandatory for them to stay with GovGuam. If you're a police officer, you go through, or customs, you go through this whole cycle. The GovGuam spends money to train them, but there's no mandate that you must stay employed. As soon as they complete the training, they're ready to go to any federal agency, law enforcement. Why? Because they're qualified. They're ready to go. And I'm just concerned is that we're investing money for hiring people, but we're not making sure they don't run away that easy. I'm very concerned is that there appears to be no mechanism to protect our assets. Okay? On another issue, just making general statements. Okay, so Ed, you can take care of this. Cost, you asked for increase in rental space funding. The cost for rent versus building your own. Yeah, we brought this up. We talked offline.
Yes. Yeah, Senator, before I answer that, could I just get back to your last point? Because it's important, and I mentioned it once before, but as far as comparison with autonomous agencies, one of the autonomous agencies was advertising for an accountant 1, and they were paying them more than I could pay an accountant 2. And that obviously makes us not competitive. But also we have attempted, as far as accountants are concerned, to enter into some discussions with the OG about at least providing a path for EOG accounting graduates to come into government service. You know, the Department of Administration has to deal with many more things than autonomous agencies or any other agency. So it's great training for an accountant to go into Department of Administration. To some extent, we're lucky that we've managed to retain people who stay because they just like to work there. And I'm grateful for that, and we want to foster, the feeling that it's a good place to work. But unfortunately, we can't kick against the pricks, and if autonomous agencies offer more, we have no method of matching that. So we look hopefully to you senators to try and help us even equalize that. With regard to premises, it is one of the things we've been looking at. We do have a germ of some ideas of what we might do to move out of rented premises. It's not ideal where we are because we've got some people on the ground floor. I'm on the second floor with Shane and some other departments, and accounting is on the 7th floor. That's not ideal for communications. The longer you get, and GSA's miles away, right? So we are looking at. I have some ideas, but they're very early ideas. But thank you for mentioning it.
All right, and when we mentioned earlier about the pay disparity, right, on the Hay study, because it's been all over the news. Security guard at port makes more than a police officer. I'm going to be asking Port Authority to justify how they do that. Because they may be autonomous, but it's coming out of all of our backs. They don't make their own money. We pay for whatever comes into the port. No different, we pay for the power bill and water bill. You can set your what you want to pay them, but just understand that it impacts all Guam. I mean, I can already imagine. I'll go to school to be a police officer, and I'm a former police officer, but I'm going to go down to Port Authority because I'm going to get paid more. How does that make sense? And I'm going to be a security guard. Nothing against the security guard. Good for him, but it's against the police officer, the individual that wants to be a peace officer. Because I would be asking DOA to please, if you can, provide what it costs when Guam at one point increased 40% peace officers' pay. I'm curious to know what did that cost them and how that can be entertained and addressed in reference to police, law enforcement across the board. Because it's quite obvious the Post needs to pick up speed and start communicating to you, Shane, probably, and saying, hey, what can we do to take care of our law enforcement? And across the board for everyone else, the nurses, teachers, everybody's going to be complaining. Buyers, it's like what Claudia said. Going to, I guess, do a reclassification. I get worried about that word because across the board, almost every agency should be doing reclassification. But then the question when I ask is, why didn't you ask and promote them to begin with? Why do you need to use why do you want to throw that at Shane? Says, Shane, do a reclass. It's ironic because it's from the same agency internally, but I understand. I understand where you come from, Claude, because you have folks that have been there, been doing Bar 1 forever. They need to move up. Let's figure this out. But I hope to get an update on this thick document so that everybody can see it and see the adjustment. You ask for a position, maybe at least put it in, even though it's vacant. Just put it in so we can see it. And then when we talk about procurement requirements, let's be consistent with the law. Let's figure this out so we're very, very proactive, not reactive. All right, Mr. Byrne? Other than that, we will conclude the discussion on the budget. The committee will continue to receive testimonies. Please address your written testimony to the Committee on General Government Operations, Appropriations, and Housing, and submit it via email to Senator Joe S. Agustin@gmail.com or to my office located at Rand Care Building, 2nd floor, Suite 3, 761 South Marine Corps Drive, Tamuning, Guam. Zizus Masi for your attendance and participating in today's hearing, and for those at home, thank you for watching. This budget hearing on Bill 55-36 UR relative to the Department of Administration is now adjourned. It is now 11:50. Thank you, and have a nice day and be safe.